Thank you. And we will circulate a copy of the recording and the slides by email in a couple of days. And we're also adding in a copy of the slides to the chat now. I'm not expecting any fire alarms where I am, but please do keep an ear out for this where you are. And finally, this is a safe space and we'd like everybody to please be respectful to one another in the chat and when asking questions. Next slide, please. So just our agenda for today. So quick introduction from me before I hand over to presentations from our brilliant speakers, Mo and Tom and Sam from Stone King. And we've left plenty of time for a Q&A before a bit of signposting to lots of great resources for you and hopefully closing at 12 o'clock. Next slide. So just a very brief introduction for anybody who is unfamiliar with us. We are NCVO, that's the National Council for Voluntary Organisations, the largest network for charities and volunteering in England. We're very proud to represent and support over 17,000 voluntary organisations of all sizes. So from very big household names to the smallest community groups. And we would love you to join us. Next slide. By becoming a member of NCVO, you can save time and money, and you get access to information and guidance, downloadable tools and templates, discounted training, research, and much more. But only members have complete access to everything we offer. But I'd like to point out here that if you're a small charity or voluntary organisation with an income of under £30,000, membership is free. So before we start, and before I hand over to our fantastic first speaker, Mo, Chanel is going to launch a poll for me. So it's got 3 questions, and we would like to hear from you a little bit about you. We want to know who's with us today. So that should have popped up on your screen now. If you could please answer those 3 questions to give us an idea of who we've got in the room with us today, and we'll share those results so everyone can see. We've got a real mix of organisations here today. Yeah. A real variety of income size, cause, and a real split between who has employees and who is volunteer only. We'll just give it just another minute. Nearly everybody's participated now. It's really great for us to get a picture of who's in the room with us today. Okay, if we could end that poll, please, and share the results so that our speakers can get an idea of who's in the room with us today. Okay, and without further ado, I'm going to hand over to our first speaker, the lovely Mo.
Hello, everybody. Lovely to be here. I am Mo Wiltshire, and I'm a senior governance consultant here with NCVO. So a little bit about my background and a little bit about the work that we do as governance consultants. So as a governance consultant, I spend my time as part of the team supporting trustees to develop their skills and confidence in terms of their wider trustee duties and good practice in governance. And we train around 1,000 trustees every year through our charity trustee induction and refresher training. And we also work with lots and lots of governance professionals through our supporting good governance training. And we work in-house as well. And we also do lots of governance reviews. So we do deep dives into organisations and look at their governance and how we can support them to build on their strengths and to develop their opportunities. So as part of that, we get to spend a lot of time observing board meetings, and we also get to talk with lots of trustees and those who support them about what works and actually what can be a barrier successful board meetings. So it's with that lens that I'm able to share some insight today. In terms of me, so before I joined NCVO as a governance consultant, I spent 25 years in the charity sector, mainly in education, youth and human rights charities, wearing a range of different hats really. So I've been a volunteer, I've been a trustee, I've also been a chair of governors, and staff-wise, I've done a range of different roles, including Director of Governance, Designated Safeguarding Lead, and Chief Exec. Next slide, please. Lovely. So how we're going to spend some time together is exploring effective board meetings using the kind of 5 Ps framework. So this isn't a particularly an NCVO framework. It's been around for some time, and sometimes you see slightly different Ps substituted for each other. And for those of you who might have worked with Six Sigma or other schemes of work similar to that, you might have come across this before, but it's quite a useful way of exploring different ways that board meetings can be really effective. And we're also going to share some common tensions that we observe or get asked about through our practical support, and some ways that we can seek to avoid them. Thank you very much. Next one, please, Chanel. So the first P that we're going to look at is purpose. Now, if we think about board meetings, whatever size of organisation that you're from, and we've seen that there's a range here, as we know there's a range across the 163,000 registered charities that there are in England and Wales, is that board meetings can be some of our most costly time that we spend as an organisation. If we think about the number of humans who are involved in attending across trustees and the staff or volunteers that support them, but they can also be some of the most valuable hours that we spend. So it's an absolutely critical moment to look at the impact that boards can make on behalf of their organisation to kind of really further why they exist. So what's really important when you're looking at board meetings is to be clear on the purpose. So there are different types of board meetings. There are those that are the quarterly, or sometimes some organisations meet every couple of months to review performance, to kind of connect with the wider operations of the organisations and make the decisions that are needed to further the strategy. Many organisations find it's really helpful to have some time together looking at strategy in depth. So there's often one or more strategic away days in a year. And also where there are significant opportunities that have arisen, perhaps a new pot of funding that's come up or a campaign to launch, or if something's not gone right in terms of instant response, there can be single issue board meetings. That's great that there's a range of different types. What's really helpful is if the purpose of a meeting is absolutely clear to everyone who's involved in it. So what is it that that meeting needs to achieve? The same is true for items on the agenda. So being really clear, actually, is this something that's simply for information? Is it possibly read only? So you're not going to be expected to discuss it in a board meeting? Is it an area where a decision is needed? Also is helpful to be clear. And many charities and voluntary organisations find developing some standard board templates so that whoever's writing the paper, actually there's the same approach that's used. Just makes it easier for people to engage with it. And many organisations within those kind of standard board templates, they include links to how this is furthering the strategy, so that we can make sure that absolutely all our focus is being spent on furthering our direction, and also sometimes areas for consideration. So some organisations find linking it to the risk register if you have one, or key risks that you're facing, and also showing how actually your organisational values are linked to the item that you're discussing for decision. Many board meetings spend their time looking at proposals for doing something differently or continuing to do something. A framework that we've encountered that actually many find quite useful in a practical way is looking at actually why this item's been brought for a decision. So why this is a need that's been identified, why it's been identified that it needs to be addressed now, why you as your charity should be the ones that do it, and why actually the proposal that's being put forward is the right way of addressing that need. And what's also quite helpful in terms of surfacing discussion is having a think about why it might be an idea not to do it, so that you've explored all those different opportunities. That can particularly help where perhaps there's power dynamics in a board to be navigated, making sure that actually there's a framework that allows people to see different angles of a proposal. And it's also really helpful in proposals to make clear when perhaps there's particular legal considerations trustees need to bear in mind, or it links to an element within your governing document. Next slide, please. So I just thought we'd include this within our governance reviews work, and in lots of the training that we do, we refer to the Charity Governance Code. I'm sure a number of you are familiar with it. There are kind of different elements of recommended practice for charities above 1 million, which is considered a large charity, and those below 1 million. I know we've got a number on the call today, but it's worth thinking about what the Charity Good Governance Code recommends in terms of how the board spends its time. And it's about that partnership, the chair working with board members and staff, plan the board's program of work. So all the different types of meeting purposes you need to have, and make sure trustees have the necessary information, time and space to explore key issues and reach well-considered decisions so that a valuable board time is well used. Next slide, please. The next P that we're looking at is preparation. So it's the basics. It's being really clear actually about which of your meetings are in person, and so that the venue is made clear as early as possible. And if it's online, actually making sure that people understand how it's going to be hosted, and how to access that. And that's covered in induction. And it's really important that there are regular moments across the year to make sure people can let you know about accessibility considerations that need to be taken into account when you're planning those board meetings. It's recommended good practice to have a cycle of business so that you're really clear actually how the year's cycle fits together. So are there key points in the year when you need to approve budgets or consider half-yearly results, for example, so that that's set out so that everybody can make sure that they have maximum opportunity to engage, because we do know that decisions are made by those who show up, as people say. And it's also important to think about many charities and voluntary organisations find it helpful to have spotlight sessions, or some organisation call them mission moments, where members of your staff or volunteer team might appear and share a little bit more about their work so that you can really connect with your organisation. That's great practice, but do consider kind of actually the needs of those staff members and volunteers in terms of the timing and planning of your cycle. To make sure people have the chance to exercise their duty of care and to have enough opportunity to really engage with the papers you've spent probably many hours preparing, it's really a good practice to circulate 7 days before. Your governing document might even include requirements for how long before you need to share your supporting papers. And you also, many organisations find it helpful to have the opportunity to email queries or request additional information beforehand, and often set a deadline that just encourages the chance for your staff or volunteers to be able to go and research the answers to your questions. Practicalities of accessing papers or slides. Again, it's important to think about accessibility here. For many, find it useful to get papers as far in advance as possible rather than tabled at the meeting. Often, a decision or a set of results that you're looking at will have previous information that's relevant to it. Being really clear how you can get access to those past papers. Many boards nowadays use software like SharePoint or Google Drives, or many large organizations often use board portals to make sure that people have access to kind of go away on their own and research, making sure they prepare appropriately for this valuable time together. It's really helpful to, particularly if you are sharing papers in advance or slides in advance, to support accessibility rather than because it's expected to read them. It's helpful to make that clear. And one of the areas that we find that some boards struggle with is when there's significant amounts of data that's shared without a kind of so what commentary, making clear the key things to focus your governance questions on and where you can get further information. So we like to think of it as making sure your board papers can pass the person on the street test, so that they're written with no jargon and actually you can pick them up and understand, all of those whys that we talked about. Next question, please. Not question. So this is a tool from our Supporting Good Governance course that we run. And this is kind of one of the templates that can be used to set out your board calendar and make it available for everyone to plan their time in advance. Next slide, please. So when we're looking at participants, so you need to think about that balance between making sure that you've got board connection to staff and volunteers. So we talked about those spotlights and staff members or volunteers coming to speak to their papers. But you need to make sure that there's not so many people who aren't trustees in the room that can stifle discussion. And the best way of checking whether you've got the balance right is to talk about it in your board meeting. So making sure that there's space when you're alone just as trustees to reflect on actually what's working about how your boards are operating and what could be different. It's also important that everybody's clear on the key roles. So your chair, as chair of the meeting, or many organizations have co-chairs, looking at making sure that you're running the meeting to time and in a way where everyone's able to participate in a way that works for them, and that you're not deviating from the key areas that you need to focus on. And also, if there's a conflict of interest for a chair, to know who's going to take over chairing that meeting if there's an item that affects that. And secretary is obviously absolutely critical to make sure meetings are recording effectively. And I know Tom and Sam are going to talk about that shortly. Being really clear on closed and open items is good practice. So who can be in the room when there are items that might be confidential or on which there's a conflict of interest, and how those records are captured is a good idea to work through. And I know there's going to be more conversation in the next session looking at conflicts of interest in detail. So I won't go too much into that now, but actually, Chanel, if we can go to the next slide. I just thought I'd also share that within our NCVO help and guidance pages, we've got lots of resources on managing conflicts of interest alongside legal considerations too. Next slide, please. Okay, so process. So absolutely helping making sure that the agenda makes sense and that the chair is involved in agreeing it, that they're timed and that there's links to supporting materials is really helpful, and it reflects that cycle of business. Good chairs look at actually how to make sure those who are being quiet but perhaps having insightful thoughts are able to contribute, and that there's not too many dominant voices in the room, and looking at the power dynamics of who can access where. It's also really important in terms of board culture to look at actually the codes of conduct. So how are you going to operate as a board? What are the, particularly if there is a hybrid or an online meeting, agreeing how to question, how to have discussions, where disagreements are. And for those of you who remember kind of Jackie Weaver and that viral COVID things that we all laughed about over COVID, being really clear who has the authority to speak when and where is a helpful discussion to have as a board. Next slide, please. So this is just something there are links that we can share. This is about thinking about your board culture and something that we find boards need to think about very carefully to make sure they're getting that right balance in terms of high support. So they're being encouraging of what's working and they're rewarding with praise, but they're also constructively challenging in terms of that wider context to make sure that they're clear actually the context for that support, so that you're asking questions to keep it real as you're making decisions as you go forward. Next slide, please. And lastly, in terms of the 5 Ps, looking at progress. So if you're really that you've achieved the purpose that your meeting was designed to achieve. So as a board, you've made sure the decisions you've made are collective ones, that you've understood your quorum. So actually how many people need to be involved to make a decision legit, if you like, and that where there is disagreement, that they are minuted, and that you've thought about making sure the minutes reflect how you've considered your key duties as a trustees, that the decisions actually translate into action and you've recorded those in appropriate ways. And where there's delegations, you've been really clear actually who is being delegated to, what they have the power to do, and actually when it is they're expected to feed back. Next slide, please. So just quickly, I said we'd talk about some of the pressure points or challenges that we hear about that may resonate for some of you, but some of the key issues can be boards not making decisions. So where there are staff of volunteers awaiting a decision, but actually they're not able to make it at that stage. And that's about making sure you've got regular communication with your chair and those around the board table to understand what information is going to be needed for the board to make those decisions, to manage expectations of those relying on an outcome from the meetings. Sometimes closed or private board sessions can create mistrust or challenges if it's not clear the purpose of it. So that's about being really transparent why the trustees might need to meet alone. Making sure that it's understood what's the appropriate contact between board members and other staff. So are questions welcomed outside of the board meeting, or are they perceived as interference? Actually, does everything need to go through your chief exec if you have one, or actually can you go directly? And there's lots of different ways that work with different cultures. Just being really clear what's expected can help alleviate that problem. When many of our board members wear different hats, so they might also be volunteers, for example, being really clear actually what those boundaries are and which hat you're wearing when you're engaging with others from the organisation. Trustees either not having enough time to deliver on what they want to, so they can't attend meetings when they plan to, or they can't have much connection outside, or they've got too much and they might be tempted to be overly involved, crossing that strategic into operation. Making sure that it's clear about the process for appraising chief executives or senior members of staff, and making sure actually there's transparency as well about how pay policies are going to be implemented and what to do when you're handling a crisis. And final slide from me, please. So yes, so the preventing the problems, absolutely making sure that your trustees feel supported in understanding their role, they're recruited to what they're expected to be asked to do, and they're thoroughly inducted and supported to make sure that we're able to make the most of amazing skills and lived experience of all those around the board table. Having lots of policies so that it's transparent about actually how things work, a proportionate amount of policy for your size, and we have guidance on kind of what we consider essential policies on the NCVO website, explaining what kind of that constructive challenge looks like in terms of behaviours that support holding to account, and making sure that you've got papers that work in the right way. So one of my past organisations that I worked for was a student-led organisation, and we did have some feedback from trustees actually that the story of the boards weren't told clearly enough. So explaining why we were looking at the decisions we were looking at, and making sure that we supported them with key questions for consideration for each item. So as a result of that feedback, we moved actually from Word document packs into very carefully created PowerPoint slides that really concentrated our information in a way that supported trustee engagement with great effect. So there's some of the tensions that we see and some of the ways you can prevent the problems. And hopefully that 5Ps framework is useful for you to take back to your charities and voluntary organisation and consider further. I'm now going to hand over to Tom and Sam from Stone King, who are going to share some of the legal perspective on good and effective board meetings. Thanks.
Excuse me. Thanks, Mo. That was really great. Really nice to see such a practical and governance-focused summary. There's a lot of ground to cover there. I hope all of you found Mo's talk really helpful. I found it really interesting as a lawyer practicing in charity law. Sam and I, Sam Dagville's going to do the presentation, and I'm going to chirp up from time to time and help Sam. I hope I help and not interrupt him too much. But certainly from our perspective, we work with charities the whole time, charities and not-for-profits the whole time. We work at Stone King, a firm that specialises in this stuff. And the stuff that Mo's been talking about is really practical. And I hope you've got time to digest that stuff that she's given you. What Sam and I are going to cover is the sort of legal perspective. It actually overlaps a lot with what Mo's been saying, because actually what's some of the reasons why you're doing this stuff, some of the reasons why you have meetings and your responsibilities as trustees really plays out in a legal way in those with those practical effects that Mo's alluding to. So just to recap, because I hope you really know this stuff, trustees, almost all of us are volunteers when we act as trustees. You have a personal responsibility. Sam's going to get into this a bit more. You have a personal responsibility to advance the purposes of your charity as you see fit. It's all about the purposes of your charity, right? In charity law, we talk about objects. You know, making your charity effective at doing what it's set up to do is what it's all about. So personally, we're talking about your responsibilities as trustees, individually and collectively. But in terms of your organisation, we're talking about the purpose of the organisation. So that's a really nice way that Mo brought in the purpose really early in her Ps, her 5 Ps there. I also want to just say something before I hand over to Sam about meetings. They are really sort of, they're the nuts and bolts of how you do your work as a trustee in a way, and they're all about decision making really. Whether you're having them for the routine purposes Mo was alluding to, or whether you've got them for a particular purpose because there's something on the horizon you want to tackle. Fundamentally, they're about getting as good a decision as you can out of it, okay? So all that stuff about preparation and planning is really, really important. Discussion is really important. Disagreement is permitted. And it's really about being able to document and to make a really careful, robust decision so that you get your organization's purpose achieved the best way. So that's the main, but I also just want to mention a kind of secondary thing. It's kind of evidence, right? So your minutes are almost as important as your meeting. And we're going to touch on that when Sam and I go through this, showing how you've recorded your decision, in particular difficult decisions, we're going to touch on them. It's really important that you've explained to yourselves in a way, but if the Charity Commission or someone else came along, that you could explain in retrospect why you did something. It's a really important thing, okay? So that's enough from me. I've explained I'm Tom Murdoch, I'm a partner at Stone King. This is our sort of, this is what we do all day long. Sam, I work very closely with Sam. We're in Leeds and London based and all over the country really. We'd love to, final thought from me, I really will shut up soon, honestly. Some really nice questions coming through already. I've got some thoughts and I'm sure Mo and Sam will too on those questions. We'll come to them, I think, at the end. So Sam, over to you. Sorry to taking up so much of your time.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, and hi everyone. I think next slide, please, Lara. Thank you. So as Tom mentioned, in the next part of the session, we're going to take a quick look at a number of specific legal topics that are relevant to trustee meetings. So the rules governing trustee meetings, where to find them and how they differ between charities, roles and responsibilities of different individuals who attend trustee meetings, some of the key principles that trustees should apply when making decisions at meetings, specifically a section on identifying conflicts of interest, which can be particularly problematic, and also, as we touched on there, the importance of taking and retaining accurate trustee minutes. Next slide, please. So the first point we're going to quickly look at is the rules governing board meetings. So the first place to look when identifying the rules of a meeting is the governing document. So the governing document might vary between different charities. So if it's a charitable trust, it might be a trust deed or charitable company articles. But in any event, there should be a specific provision in a specific section in there which deals with how trustee meetings should be held. Some governing documents might contain a very brief section which just states that the trustees may conduct proceedings as they see fit, which is usually very helpful and provides flexibility, while some may be more prescriptive and include specific details about how and when meetings are held. Either way, trustees should review the governing document and consider the provisions which apply. They should also consider any supplementary bylaws or statutory provisions which might also apply. These will vary depending on the nature of the charity and also any internal governance that it has. So care should be taken when considering and applying those. Trustees should also consider what type of meeting is actually being held, as the rules which govern how trustee board meetings are held are different to those which govern how meetings of the charity's members, or sometimes referred to as general meetings, are held. For some charities, such as charitable trusts that don't have a membership, that might not be problematic, but for other charities that do have a membership, and particularly those where the trustees and members are the same individuals, it can become slightly more complex. It's important, even if the trustees and members are the same individuals, though, to remember that they are two separate roles and that they wear different caps at different times, and to apply the different rules which apply to the certain type of meeting being held. An additional question, which has become particularly relevant in the post-pandemic era, is whether trustees can hold meetings electronically, for example, by Zoom or by Teams. Again, the starting point is to check the governing document. The general position is that unless electronic meetings are expressly prohibited in the governing document, then trustee meetings can be held electronically, though that is providing that all trustees can interact with each other and participate effectively in the meeting. It's worth just noting as a final point here that the rules for general or member meetings are different to trustee meetings in regard to holding them electronically, and that they are the rules are more prescriptive and strict. We won't go into detail about those rules in this webinar, but it is just worth trustees remembering the rules are different, and so to take care when applying those. Thank you. Next slide, please. The second topic we'll quickly look at is the different roles and responsibilities of individuals who attend trustees. So as Tom alluded to before, the first key point to note is that all trustees who participate in meetings have both individual and collective responsibilities. They have a duty to act independently as individuals and to act in accordance with the trustee duties at all time. So that includes advancing the purposes of the charity, but also other duties such as acting with reasonable care and skill when making decisions, and managing the charity's resources responsibly. The Charity Commission's published very helpful guidance on the essential trustee duties, and we've included a link at the end of the presentation to the relevant guidance page. As well as the individual responsibility, trustees also must act collectively as a board. While it's healthy for individuals to think independently and for debate and discussion and even disagreement at times to take place, it's important that ultimately it's the majority decision which applies, and the trustees take decisions collectively as a board. Certain trustees may also have additional responsibilities, such if they're appointed as the chair or secretary of the meeting, which Mo alluded to earlier. And whilst the responsibilities of these roles are often similar, so for example, the chair is responsible for working through the agenda and facilitating debate, the specific requirements may differ for each charity. So again, it's important to check the governing documents to see which rules might apply. A final point to note here is that non-trustees may also be invited as guests to meetings or to certain parts of meetings. This often includes professional advisors, for example, accountants, solicitors, who can turn up for part of the meeting and provide specialist advice on particular points. Thank you, Tom.
I'm really sorry, Sam. Can I just jump in? But I was just going to quickly mention about how we're going to come back to the individual and collective responsibility of trustees, particularly when we look at managing conflicts of interest. And so I hope you remember what Sam said there. But also just to touch on chair. Some people think the chair is a sort of super trustee. It really is not. Occasionally, a chair has a casting vote, which gives them a slightly elevated role. But really, it's quite an onerous role. It's quite a difficult role. It's there to manage meetings, as Sam has said, make sure things occur fairly. But it's above all to kind of get a sense of to help the meeting get a sense of its collective opinion. That's the way I like to put it. So it's a sort of a facilitating role almost, and there's a further role in which it's facilitating because in many charities, as Mo alluded, sometimes communications with the executive are best managed through the chair, right? So there's a lot in the role of chair, but it's not a super trustee. It's quite a responsible, difficult role. Sorry, Sam, back to you.
No, thank you, Tom. Thank you. And I think the final point to note, just in relation to non-trustees, is whilst they can inform the debate at a meeting, they shouldn't take part in the decision-making process itself, and of course should not be able to vote. And also trustees cannot delegate the responsibilities to trustees, so they can't pass on their responsibility from to professional advisors or guests at a meeting, so they can't pass on their responsibility for decision-making too. Thank you. Next slide, please. So the third point we are just going to look at briefly are the principles which apply when trustees are making decisions. And the Charity Commission's published really helpful guidance on this point in its guidance note CC27. It's your decision, which talks for a number of key principles which trustees should always have at the back of their mind when making decisions. So some of these include acting within their powers, acting in good faith and only in the interest of the charity, making sure they're sufficiently informed, which is what Mo was talking about earlier in terms of preparing for the meeting and reading the papers in advance, etc. Taking account of all relevant factors, including what the potential risks and benefits might potentially be, equally ignoring any irrelevant factors. So putting aside any personal prejudices or motives or grudges or anything like that that a trustee might have, managing conflicts, which we'll speak about in a minute, and ultimately making decisions that any reasonable trustee board could make. And in regard to this final point, it's important to note that the Commission recognises that trustees are humans, and that every decision a trustee board makes will not always turn out to be successful or the best one. So it's not the Commission's job to try and assess whether a decision of a trustee board is good or bad. What it's interested in seeing is that trustees have considered the decision and taken a reasoned and informed approach to whatever decision is made.
Sam, can I join in again there?
Yeah.
What Sam said there is really important. The Commission doesn't want to stifle risk-taking, for example. You can make mistakes, right? Trustees, it's all right to make what turns out to be a bad decision in retrospect, but to make a careful decision. So we're going to talk. So I've already touched on how minutes are helpful evidence of a careful decision. Mo has talked about the stuff that you want to do in terms of preparation to make sure all the relevant information's there and so on. That's really, really important. But so it's all about making a good decision, even if it turns out to be the wrong one in retrospect. It doesn't matter. Try and make a good decision at the time. And Sam isn't trying to say that you need to go through all this stuff every time, right? One of the reasons why this checklist is really helpful is because sometimes you will be faced with difficult decisions. So hopefully this will help you take a difficult decision, but also showing that you've gone through these points will help anyone who wants to check up on what, anyone who wants to scrutinize what you've done in retrospect, perhaps because it had an unforeseen consequence or it didn't work out the way you planned. Showing in your minutes and otherwise that you've gone through these factors will make your decision above criticism. Okay, so it's just a helpful protective checklist to go through, particularly when you're taking a difficult decision. Sorry, Sam, back to you.
Thanks, Tom. Thank you. And next slide, please, Lara. So quickly, some other points to consider as well when making decisions. Acting in accordance with the governing document, which we've touched on, but it is really important to check that as a starting point. As we say, some governing documents have very specific rules. Yeah, does the chair have a second or casting vote, as Tom mentioned? So really important to just check that you're still acting in compliance with that. Promoting a trustee should also promote a culture of active discussion. Constructive debate and challenge are signs of healthy governance. And trustees should actively work towards having those healthy debates. If a trustee strongly disagrees with a decision, they can ask for it to be recorded. However, as we mentioned, any final decision must be a collective one of the board. And if a trustee really disagrees with the decision and they don't want to put their name to it, they can, of course, resign in severe circumstances. Though if they do so, that should be on the basis that it is purely in the interest of the charity and not any personal conflict or grudge or motive again.
We'd generally recommend, Sam, wouldn't we? I mean, resignation is a really extreme thing to do. It's generally, even if you disagree, it's best usually to stay on the board and just provide an alternative opinion. You can have your disagreement minuted, but what's really important, Sam, I'm sorry if I'm straying into your territory here, but what's really important is that someone who disagrees with the collective board of action doesn't go outside the meeting and actively brief against it. That's a breach of a trustee duty, okay? That's really serious. So if you do disagree, record your reasons, air your reasons, have them discussed, but you need to go along with the collective decision and not discussions are confidential, aren't they, Sam, unless the board decides to release discussion. So don't, just be very careful. If you've got disagreement, it can be really healthy, really good. You usually encourage it, but just be careful when it could tip over into conflict, open conflict, which is not usually in the interests of the charity. Sorry, Sam.
Thank you. Next slide, please, Lara. Thank you. And I'm just slightly conscious of time, so we'll run through, just got a couple more slides to get through. The next point is conflicts of interest, which is a particularly problematic issue for many charities. Conflicts can actually be broken down into two subcategories as described on the slides. There is a conflict of interest, which is a situation in which a trustee's personal interests could be or could be seen to be preventing them from making a decision in the interest of a charity. So, for example, if a trustee owns a business and provides goods and services in return for payment, there could be a conflict between their personal interest and that of the charity. But there's also a conflict of loyalty. And in this situation, the trustee themselves doesn't stand to receive any personal benefit. However, their duty to another organisation could still prohibit a decision being made in the best interest of the charity. So, for example, if a trustee is on the board of a grant-making charity and another charity as well, there could be a conflict of interest between who the grant-making charity distributes grants to. So there's an important distinction to make there, but they are both conflicts. And next slide, please. So given that conflicts can be potentially detrimental to charity, it's important to manage them when they do arise. The first point to note here is that transparency is key. Conflicts are not inherently bad, and in fact they do arise naturally in many circumstances, particularly when there's trustees have or charities have close relationships with other organizations. The point, however, is to be transparent about when they do arise, so that the steps can then be taken to manage them properly and effectively. In regard to that, refer to the governing documents. The governing document itself, the constitution or articles or whatever it might be, might have a specific section on how to identify and manage conflicts. But there also might be a separate conflicts of interest policy that a charity has, as well as a public, a register of interest as well, which lists any potential conflicts that trustees might have. In regard to specific meetings itself, always important to have a meeting at the top of the agenda, an item at the top of the agenda, sorry, to declare and record any conflicts that trustees might have. And if a conflict does arise and is declared, then a general position is the conflicted trustee should withdraw from that part of the meeting and should not participate in any related discussions. However, it is worth noting that for some charities, there is an ability to authorize conflicted trustees to continue to participate, but only if they consider that to be in the best interest of the charity. It's therefore worth checking the governing document to see if any such provisions do exist, and if not, then charity commission consent might be required. If authorization is given, then a very important point is to record the basis on which that authorization was given in the trustee minutes. And next slide, please. And the importance of minutes is the final topic that we just wanted to talk about. So the importance of keeping minutes, as Tom mentioned, it cannot be underestimated, and carefully documented minutes can be extremely helpful to trustees if they're ever asked to evidence or justify a particular decision. You might have seen in the press, but just in the last week, the Commission issued an official warning against a high-profile charity called One Young World, which holds educational events and has lots of has had lots of celebrity speakers speak at those events. The warning was for, among other things, poor minute taking and a lack of evidence that conflicts were effectively managed. So again, it's a timely reminder that of the importance of ensuring that all charities, big or small, have appropriate steps in place to ensure accurate minute taking and records are maintained.
Sam, I think that's a really, really good point. But, and I think that lots of us will recognise the importance of there being evidence. But I think just in the interest of time, perhaps we better, because I think that's the main point we want to make on this slide.
It is on minutes, really. Yeah, Mo touched on what to record, but exactly. And also just retention as well. I think, just to retain minutes for a certain period. But thank you, Tom. And I think with that, back to Amy.
Yes.
At that point.
Thank you very much, Tom and Sam, and Mo as well before that. Some really excellent practical and legal considerations to make there for everyone. As you will have seen, we've had plenty of questions come in already, and we are a little bit behind. So just going to pick up on some of those. I do have one for you here, Sam or Tom. It's just to kind of clarify the point you made around the provision for holding online meetings in your governing document. So we've had somebody refer here to the guidance that the Charity Commission put out on this. And I think your point here, Sam, was if it's not explicitly forbidden, then you can hold online meetings. Can you just elaborate on that for us, please? Correct. Yes. Yeah. Unless there's a provision in the governing documents, if it's the articles or the trustee or whatever it might be, that expressly prohibits electronic trustee meetings taking place, then the general position is that they can be held electronically. So yeah, the position is slightly different, as I mentioned, for member meetings, for meetings of the members, sometimes general meetings, but for trustee board meetings, in that particular context, unless there's an express prohibition about holding meetings electronically, then they can be held via Teams or Zoom, etc. So to clarify that, Sam, there doesn't need to be
There doesn't need to be a
As
provision.
provision for it's rather, if it's not forbidden, then
Correct.
all right.
Correct.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you. And I'll put that in, that it does say that in the guidance. It says if it doesn't forbid, in other words, we'll put that a link in the chat for that to clarify that. I'm just going to pick up on some other questions. Okay, we are a small charity, so we don't have a separate executive. Board members take on active roles such as payroll, supervision of staff, running projects, and volunteering. How can the board manage that potential conflict? And I think this will probably be relevant to a lot of organizations on the call today, where people are wearing multiple hats, as you said, Sam. So I'm not sure who'd like to take that.
No, do you want to pick one up, or do you want us to?
Yes, I can do. So, I mean, so I think this is around clarity of role definition really there. So it's making sure that when trustees are acting, if you like, as a volunteer, albeit a senior volunteer, undertaking some of the, if you like, executive functions, that they are doing that with a separate role in mind, and so that you do have the ability to kind of separate and identify potential conflicts. What's interesting, though, is if there are staff in the organisation, because although it would be a matter reserved for the board ordinarily to supervise and be responsible for the hiring and dismissal of the most senior member of staff, whoever that might be, it would be unusual for board members to be undertaking regular line management, for example, of the staff team. You would ordinarily have a form of staff hierarchy, whether there are grand titles such as chief executive or not. You might want to look at actually whether there can be a greater separation in practical terms, and then revise your role descriptions to reflect that, so that you can identify and keep that separation between the strategy and the operational sides a little bit more. I don't know if Tom or Sam, you want to add your perspectives.
Yeah, and I think that's an excellent answer. It also relates to the really good question around closed sessions we got at the start of the session. It's a really good question. I think having information presented on that, which is slightly different to the point Mo was raising, I think, but I think it's complementary. The having parts of the meeting really clearly designed to be for particular purposes and almost fenced off from other parts of the meeting is really important. It helps with managing conflicts of interest, whereas Sam and others have explained we need to have people who are conflicted being obviously not part of the decision in which they're conflicted. So you ask them to depart for that part of the meeting, but in the agenda you can have parts like when the chief executive's performance or remuneration comes up, and these can be regular routine bits where it's right for that person to remain initially to provide information, context to help a good decision, but then to depart, and for that to be really clearly minuted so that there's free discussion, and for those parts of those minutes not necessarily to be shared with the chief executive, right? Because you want people to be able to speak freely and not in a way that they think is going to that might come back to bite them or embarrass them. So I hope that answers that question, and I agree with everything Mo and Sam were just saying on that too.
Brilliant. Okay. So somebody's just said in response to that, can I please clarify that you said it was unusual for the board members to line manage staff in the organisation?
Yes, that would be unusual beyond the senior member of staff. There would ordinarily be a hierarchy below the senior member of staff, whatever their title is. Yes,
Completely.
precisely. Sorry, Tom. Yeah.
Yeah, no, completely agree. Just occasionally there's a senior finance function, but Mo is completely right, really. It's beyond the immediate most senior management team. It's very unusual. She's completely agree.
Right. I'm just going to pick up on a few of the questions that Mo has already kindly answered, because I think they're very interesting and relevant to people here on the call. Sorry, just bear with me. Yes. So how do you get trustees to actively participate rather than sit and say nothing? And we've reiterated in this call the fact that it's both an individual and a collective responsibility. And Mo's put some brilliant ideas for this, which everyone should be able to see. but I wondered whether Tom or Sam had anything.
Can I add to that? Because
Yeah,
I think
yeah.
I haven't had the benefit of reading Mo's stuff, so apologies if I repeat what she says, but hopefully so there are two things I would say here, because it's really difficult. Basically, it's down to managing people, and that's a real fine art, isn't it? But recruiting the right people that Mo's touched upon is really important. Managing people, expectations, right? Two expectations you can implement that will help you do this are making sure everyone speaks, actually by physically going around the table and making sure everyone contributes to the meeting. The smallest but biggest thing in a way is I can't stand it when people think that because they're missing a meeting, they don't need to contribute. Everyone gets the papers. That means even if you're missing a meeting, you should put in your contribution about what you think is occurring in that meeting, right? Just because you can't get there because the trains are down because of hurricane and whatnot, that doesn't mean you aren't part of the conversation. So I would make it absolutely mandatory for every trustee, and it relates as well to what we were all saying earlier about how Mo said that the papers should be comprehensible to the person on the street. Agree. Sometimes that needs a little bit of help and kind of explanation, but that's true. Even if you're not experts, don't leave it to for example, in finance. Don't just leave it to the people who seem to have financial expertise. Ask your questions. You're all responsible. And if people aren't understanding that and aren't being active, then I'm afraid that's something you need to manage in terms of their performance. And the good governance code that Mo has signposted is a really good set of yardsticks for good performance. And if people aren't sticking to them, then they may not be fulfilling their role as a trustee.
Yes, to pick up on that, actually, in reference to the charity governance code, and there is a version available for small charities as well, and we've got a link to that on the next slide, and we'll also make sure we send those links afterwards. It's giving, as Tom said, kind of indicators of what good governance would look like. And there was a question which I answered, which was how many trustees are usually needed for the board to be effective, and the charity governance code does recommend that an effective board or good practice for a board would be at least 5, but no more than 12 trustees, in case that was a question for anyone else. One final question here, I think, before we move on to close, is, so we touched upon some of the officer roles, let's say, that the board could have. So you could have your chair, your secretary, your treasurer. Do we legally need to have these roles on our board?
No.
Anything more to add there?
It depends if the constitution. So sometimes the constitution can require them, but you really you don't. It's the trustee role is key. It's a bit like sorry, I'm doing too much talking. We're short of time.
No, you're not at all,
That's
Tom. And I think I loved how you put it. So the chair is not a super trustee, and
no,
the same goes for the treasurer.
No, absolutely right. So you only need these roles if the constitution requires them. If the constitution requires them, you think you don't need them, change the constitution. You need what the board thinks you need. What you think you need is what you need, right? If you take a careful decision, and change the constitution if it seems to be unduly restrictive. Don't stick with something that's making you jump through hoops you don't need to jump through. And the chair, he, she, they, whoever it is, certainly isn't a super trustee. And
I think the running theme throughout this is check your governing document. If in doubt, go back to your governing document, which is what we say all the time to people on the help desk. That's your first port of call for answering any governance questions like this. Lovely. So what we will do is compile those questions in the Q&A and make sure that information is sent out to you, because we've had some great questions in there and some brilliant answers from Mo and Sam and Tom there as well. If I could just get my final slides, please. So my colleague Chanel is just going to pop a poll for you, just to get an idea of whether you found this meeting useful and whether you've learned something today that you'll be able to apply going forward. And there will be a longer evaluation form, but really only 5 minutes or so, that will pop up as soon as you close Zoom today. And we'd be really grateful if you would participate. It helps us to build on our webinar program going forward. We very much take on board your feedback and try and incorporate that into our program. Thank you to everybody who's participated so far. I will just give it a couple more minutes, and then I've got some signposting for you, but you should also have these links in the slides that have been circulated, and we'll include them in the follow-up email as well. Thank you to everybody who participated so far. Just my next slide, please, Lara. So we've covered a lot of information today. I know everybody will probably need a little bit of time to let that sink in and to kind of reflect on some actions that you could take going forward. And we've got lots of guidance here at NCVO as part of our free help and guidance. I've noted a couple in particular there, making decisions as a board and running good meetings. And we do also have lots of member-only downloadable tools, a huge board basics section, all the things you could need as a trustee board to make your meetings effective. We've also got lots of governance training, including charity trustee induction and refresher for any of those trustees who are not participating, not doing, performing their role. Send them on this training. It's actually sold out in January, but there are spaces left in our February session. Thank you, Chanel. Just put a link in there to all of our governance training. I also wanted to give a shout out to NCVO governance consultancy and mentoring. Mo is one of our fabulous governance consultants, and we'll pop some more information about that in the follow-up email. And also just wanted to remind you that NCVO is here for small charities. I'm from the practical support team, and my colleague Lara's on the call as well. We run our small charity help desk, where we can answer any question that you might have about the setup and running of your organisation. And we'll pop those details in the chat as well. And finally, our next free practical support webinar is Valentine's themed in February, all about building successful funding relationships. So don't miss it. And here is just some key Charity Commission guidance that you must refer to. Really key stuff there. And Sam has already referenced those in his presentation as well, and the Charity Governance Code as well, which is all the good practice for good governance. Final slide, please. So finally, just a huge thank you. I know people have started to head off already. Big thank you to our fantastic speakers, Mo, Sam and Tom. I really hope you found that useful. I certainly did. And we will be following up with you, giving you all of that key information. Any further questions, please come to our small charity help desk. And if you're not a member of NCVO, we'd love to have you join us. There's a QR code there on your screen, which you can scan with your smartphone to take you to our membership page, which tells you all about the member benefits and how to join. It's free for those with an income of under £30,000, don't forget. Okay, hope everybody has a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you very much for joining us and hope to see you very soon. Thank you, everybody.